A very good morning to all of you, and welcome to this very special session of D Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. As all of us are aware, the pandemic has disrupted foundational literacy and numeracy for millions of children across the world, especially those who are on the wrong side of the digital divide. Uh, Years of gains and efforts which have been made and the progress which has been made to improving foundational learning is facing a roadblock and possible reversal because of the learning losses as well. And in order to avoid a situation where we lose a large number of our children to illiteracy, we need disruptive solutions. We need solutions that can really disrupt the status quo and get foundational learning back on track. And one such organization which is leading the charge in this mission is Room to Read. And today we have a very special guest from Room to Read. He is the country director of Room to Read India. Previously, he has been associated with USAID and closely worked in the implementation of the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan as well. And he is an architect by training. So maybe that's why he's designing the dreams and learning of millions of children across India. So with this, we would like to welcome Mr. Saurav Banerjee. Uh, Thank you, Saurav, for joining us and for giving your valuable time to this forum.
Thank you, Masood. It's a pleasure to be part of this forum.
Thank you. So Saurav ji has a presentation for us where he's going to speak about where do we move ahead from the current present context in terms of foundational literacy and numeracy, foundational learning, foundational literacy specifically. And he's also going to shower light on how the innovative solutions have been working in Room to Read's intervention during the COVID period, and how what is the plan for the next 5 years? How do we move ahead from this when schools reopen? So Saurabh you may start the presentation. We'll just share it here on the screen as well.
Sure, Masood. I think the presentation is basically what I'm going to talk about is a bit about Room to Read, the kind of work that we do, how our work has been affected by the pandemic, and how we could quickly pivot our activities to try and address the needs of the children in this situation. And standing where we are today, how do you see going forward the entire discourse on FLN going forward? Where do we see that going? That's what I'll essentially try to cover in my presentation. So, Masood, if you can move to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just a bit about Room to Read. I mean, we have an organization which was set up globally in 2000, and in India, we started operations in 2004. Currently, we are working in 9 states across India, and we are in 16 countries across the world, mainly in Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. These are our focus countries because that's where the need is the most. We work in 2 main pillars. So one is foundational literacy, and the other one is girls' education. Uh, in India, we have almost reached out to 4.78 million children since our beginning. Next slide, please. So just talking a bit about the challenges in foundational literacy, and these were challenges even pre-COVID. So I'm talking about a time when even say 2 years back, when we were just started hearing about the learning crisis, which the NEPs so eloquently calls is the learning crisis. But we have been hearing about this fact of children not reading at the early grades, especially they are not being able to read and write at the levels they are expected to. And we have been hearing that ever since the ASA report started reporting this data. So there was generally several challenges that we could identify on the foundation literacy sphere. I mean, the first, of course, was there was generally no focus on the early grades. So if you go to the field, if you go to remote areas, rural areas, you'll find that if you go to school in any rural area, what you will see is that the focus of the school administration and the teachers is is always on the higher grades, right? Like grades 3, 4, 5 at the max. Especially if it's a secondary school, you will find all the teachers more focused on grade 8, 9, 10. So for grades 1 and 2, it was almost as if that you don't need to really bother about them. वो तो आ ही जाएगा type. That was a kind of an attitude, and which I think did a lot of harm, because we all know the research, the evidence all suggests that if you do not intervene in the foundational years, that's the gap that gets created is very difficult to meet up over the years. So I think the lack of focus on foundation grade was a big challenge, and which also got reflected in the fact that foundational learning was not part of our pre-service teacher training. It was not a significant part of in-service teacher training. We have never bothered so much as a nation to work on dedicated materials for foundation learning. I mean, even if we talk of teaching learning materials, the focus always has been on higher grade STEM, on those kind of concepts, but not really on the foundational concepts. Again, I mean, the general refrain in the teaching community, especially in not so resource schools, has been like Hindi mein kya sikhana hai, Hindi to bacche seekh hi jate hain. So I think that kind of a attitude and that kind of a mindset has had plagued the foundation literacy sector even pre-COVID. The other significant uh, challenge has been the whole issue of language, which again the national education policy has thrown light on that very eloquently. And the fact that most of the children in our country have a language or grow up with a language at home, which is different from the language that's being taught in the school. In many cases, significantly different. You might have a tribal child coming into a school where his or her home language is very different from the language that she has to learn in the school. In some cases, it's minor difference, but I think even in the best of circumstances, if you take a situation like UP, maybe, I mean, the school language is Hindi, and most children probably have variations of Hindi, but the variations are quite substantial in terms. I mean, a person who has grown up, a very little child who has grown up, especially speaking in Bhojpuri all the time, suddenly, if, when she gets into a school which kind of teaches you in Manak Hindi, that can be quite a challenge. And so this whole issue about language has been almost brushed aside by our education system for quite some time. And I think it's good that the NEP is bringing this up front. And that's been one of the other challenges on foundation literacy um, uh, pre-COVID. And then if we move to the next slide, uh, what happened is when COVID struck, I mean, there were additional challenges that came in. So the additional challenges that came in were two types. I mean, there were student-related challenges. Uh, the student-related challenges mainly were that children schools were closed, so children had nowhere to go. But for the last 1.5 years, you have children who have not attended school, which is a big problem. Children who are getting into grade 3 next year would probably have learned nothing by the time they get into grade 3. And I mean, it's a big learning loss that you will have to deal with. It's a big, I won't even say in higher grades, it's not even a learning loss. It's almost a regression of the learning that they have had. So it's a big challenge on the student mind. The other significant component of this is this whole digital divide. While what has happened is when the COVID struck, naturally a lot of governments and even non-government organizations, just because schools were closed, because children were not accessible, they quickly moved to come up with digital solutions. And I think that was a good initial reaction. Everybody wanted to kind of reach out to the children, and therefore they came up with these solutions. But again, by the end of last year, we had studies coming out. We had our own experience that was showing that the reach of digital learning is very limited. especially when you're talking about little children. Either they do not have, I mean, most of them do not have access to a smartphone. At the most, their parents would have one, and then it's mercy of the parents to whether the child can access that phone and not. So I mean, those kind of challenges existed, and as a result, a lot of the digital content, a lot of the effort that government spent on creating and disseminating digital content were only reached only a section of the children. So that was a big challenge. The system themselves were not really prepared for this kind of uh, a major uh, challenge to the education delivery. I mean, I think nobody expected the schools would be closed for close to 2 years, and nobody expected, and so no education system really had the solutions to kind of address those kind of challenges. Additionally, there were challenges like migration. Suddenly, you found a lot of people migrating from urban areas to rural areas. So there was, and migration brought its own challenges. I mean, there were socio-emotional aspects of it that has to be dealt with children, and there was the sheer thing of a load increasing on the rural schools, because many of the children who now have been studying in the urban areas would now get enrolled in the rural schools. Many low cost private schools could not sustain, because obviously, I mean, if the schools are closed for 2 years, obviously uh, they were out of business. So those children again are coming into the government system. So there's almost a upheaval of the whole education system due to the pandemic, and I think that's a major challenge going forward on how we deal with all of this. Uh, so moving to the next slide, I'd probably talk a bit of how Room to Read traditionally approached foundation literacy. And as I said, we have been an organization who have been in this business for the last 15 years. Started in 2000 and in 2004 in India. So generally, what is our theory of change in doing that? We definitely seriously believe that foundation learning and foundation literacy is key to any success of any children growing up. And we also believe that it has to be so we call it the combination of the science of reading and the magic of reading. So science is basically, the the act of actually a child being able to identify a sound, combine sounds to form words, combine words to form sentences, the basic science of how a child learns to read. uh, but just having the science is not enough, because actually what we say that unless that science is actually backed up with a strong habit of reading, if the child is not developing a habit of reading, your reading gains are not going to sustain. So what you need to have is a combination of this reading skill plus a reading habit in order to make an independent reader. And why do you need an independent reader? Because it's only if you are in an independent reader, then you will be able to access the other aspects of the curriculum. So even if you are to kind of solve a maths problem, you'll probably first have to read the problem and understand what it's trying to ask you. So I think for every aspect of life, reading and reading with comprehension is very critical, and that we believe can happen only if the child has the right balance of the skill of reading and a habit of reading. We also look at three major pillars in developing the skill of reading. We believe that there are three aspects to learning reading or learning to read and write. One very critical aspect is orality or oral language. So any child, I mean, if you think of how we all learned how to read and write, I think the basic of learning to read and write has been your ability to listen and talk. So as a child grows up, you try to speak to the child, you try to ask the child to express. So speaking, listening, expression, these are all oral language activities which help the child to develop an understanding of the language before she even goes into reading and writing. And that that engagement with orality spans even after the child is started reading and writing. The other key component of the whole literacy game is the orthographic expertise. And orthographic expertise is basically what I said, the the act of actually identifying a sound, combining a sound uh, to form words. To in Indian languages, you have the aksharas, which is a combination of a consonant and a vowel, and how the aksharas form words, how the words form sentences, and all that. And how do you decode words? How do you blend words? These are all parts of an orthographic expertise, which needs to be developed. Which needs to be developed for a child to be able to read fluently, and fluency is again a key component of your if of your learning to read with comprehension. Because if you are not reading quick enough, what will happen is your brain is not going to remember what you're reading, and therefore would not be able to make meaning of the entire sentence that you've read. So orthographic expertise is a key component of the reading development process. And as I said, as room to read, we believe that exposure to text is very, very critical. Uh, we would we would want children to be exposed to a wide variety of children's literature. I think there's uh, no discounting the fact or underestimating the fact that books are very, very, very critical to any literacy development. And look at any person who has grown up to be a in any important field in academics. You will find that they all had a childhood which was filled with books. So I think, and somehow the government system has not really uh, emphasize the role of books and literature in development of literacy. And I think it's a very key component of our development approach that we as Room to Read take. Moving on to the next slide, which is just a bit more technical probably. What we do is as we develop our literacy programs, we focus on 8 components, and these components are again well researched, evidenced across the world. People have worked on this, and these are basically, as we say, the oral language development, phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, as I said, is very important. Uh, the whole goal being comprehension, writing, and independent reading. So these are critical components of our literacy model. So in the schools, in the where Room to Read works, we usually try to see that teachers are trained on all these components, and in a day's instruction, the teachers are able to transact all these components in the classroom. So our inputs essentially has been in terms of, as I said, supporting the teacher to implement these components in the classroom. We do create a lot of uh, uh, learning materials, and if we move to the next slide, book publishing has been a big component of what Room to Read does. And the reason for book publishing has been that in many of the geographies that we work, we found that there's there's a lack of good children's literature. You might find very good children's literature available in English and in the Western countries, but if you look at the Indian languages, the repertoire is very, very limited. Especially, you have very little children's literature available for very low, very early grades. So things like picture books, things like books with very little text and a lot of illustrations, they are not very easy to find in Indian context. Things like big books, these are all very interesting things that can engage a child in developing literacy, but that's not very easily available even in Hindi, let alone other languages. I mean, some other languages will probably have nothing available. I mean, we tried developing something in Urdu, and we found that there's hardly anything available in terms of children's literature at that age group. Or some of the Indian languages also, Telugu, for example, we didn't get enough. Books and materials available. So that's how Room to Read came into the publishing business. We thought that we have to come in to meet the gap that exists. And so, though it's not a big publishing program that we have, but we do publish. We have published over 200 titles till now. We specially focus on publishing around local languages, so tribal languages, languages like Bhojpuri, Garhwali, Chhattisgarhi. So these are areas that we have always tried to focus on, because that's where there's a serious dearth of children's literature. So that, in a nutshell, is what we typically would have done in a literacy model. So we worked with the school, trained the teachers, provided them with a lot of reading materials, the children with a lot of materials, and the objective was that we wanted to see that every child mm, develops is able to read with comprehension by the end of grade 2, and develops a habit of reading by end of grade 5. That was our like bigger goals that we always strove towards. And thankfully, in most of the cases where we have worked, we have been able to achieve this goal. So we have been able to show that it's possible to get children to read and write with comprehension by the end of grade 2, and develop a habit of reading in them by grade 5 with the correct interventions. So that was pre-COVID, and then COVID happened. So moving on to the next slide. Mm, So our COVID response strategy, as I said, had to be had three pillars. Of course, as I was saying, that schools closed, and all our work was in the schools with the teachers. So suddenly we were faced in a situation that, what do we do now? So I think our strategy post COVID focused on three different things, three different target groups, I would say: the children, the teachers, and the parents and the community. And these are key stakeholders in this process. Uh, so obviously, what we two things that we did. One, of course, develop a lot of materials, as I said. Starting with online content, starting with a lot of online content is we started with, and then soon realized that online is probably not the only solution. We'll have to look at offline contents and as well, and so then we moved to offline contents slowly. We did start engaging with teachers, because for teachers also it was a big challenging time. Suddenly you find that you are not in the classroom, yet you are supposed to be supporting the children. So what is it that you can do to help the teachers to support the children? And then, of course, family and community. We are increasingly realizing that uh, a lot of the learning will is currently happening at home, for whatever is worth. And even going forward, probably this is kind of a new normal, where children might be at school for some time, be at home, school suddenly getting closed, and then children are at home. So how to really engage parents and communities in the development of children's literacy skills? And it's interesting, because most parents would think that we are illiterate, and what can we do to contribute? And actually, we found that parents can be a huge, I mean, they can have a huge influence on developing children's literacy skills in the foundational years as well. So that's what our overall COVID strategy has been: to work on children's materials, to work with teachers to build those capacities, and to work with parents and community to see how they can support the learning process. So moving on to the next slide, I'd probably take you through some of the digital content that you're creating. So the first, so we are, as I said, that books and children's literature has been a big thing for us. I mean, we believe that children's literature and books are very, very critical to children's literacy development, and we seriously think that they should be promoted to the extent possible. So what we did, if we can go to the first link, Masoon, it's what we call the literacy cloud. Now, what is it? It's basically a web platform where we have curated set of books from all across the globe. And this is almost a kind of a digital library available to children at the click of a mouse, where they can go and explore books from all across the globe. And these are all excellent children's books, which are all leveled as per difficulty level of children. So it's actually a great resource for children, for schools, for teachers, for parents to get children excited about books, get children to read books and develop a habit of reading. So that's something that we try to promote, because in a situation where children are sitting at home, especially even in urban areas, even in private schools, a lot of children in early years, they are hardly having much of a education happening in school. So this is a very uh,
Mm.
exciting repertoire of books and materials that children can have access to.
Great.
So that's one
Saurabhji,
major initiative that we
yes.
had, and we followed it up also with many of these books are also available as in digital form, in flip book form, and have also been uploaded into government portals like Diksha and all. I mean, so we have tried to kind of get our books uh, accessible to a large number of children. So that's one kind of materials that we develop. The second one, if we can go, is basically what we call a literacy game. It's a product which is aimed for parents. It's kind of an audio product. Is aimed for parents to listen to it and see what kind of activities they can do as parents to help children help children in literacy at home. Uh, would you be able to hear that, Vasu?
Yes. So we are just sharing the games which you mentioned. Uh, so these are very interesting audio games, I think, for Uttar Pradesh, which we are going to see here. Just a second.
नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम रोहिणी रॉय है और मैं रूम टू रीड इंडिया ट्रस्ट संस्था से हूँ। आज मैं बच्चों के
Are
लिए
you able to
एक
hear the
नया
audio?
मजेदार खेल लेकर आई हूँ।
I don't
खेल
think
का
we
नाम
are
है
being able to hear
पहेलियों
that.
की
So,
दुनिया। यह खेल
Okay.
बड़ा मजेदार है। तो चलिए, अब मैं आपको बताती हूँ कि आपको बच्चों के साथ यह खेल कैसे खेलना है।
okay. Maybe you can come back to that. What I'll briefly explain the concept. The concept is basically you send out an audio message to a parent and help. And again, it's from the belief that I said a lot of parents are think that being illiterate, they will not be able to contribute much to children's learning. But actually it's not so. As parents, you can always get a child to talk about the various vegetables in the home. You get them to count things, you get them to identify pictures, uh, you get them to sit together, talk of stories, listen to stories and stuff like that. So these are kind of basic I would say parent centered content, which tells the parents on what they can do to encourage children and develop early leading skills among children. Um,
Great.
I don't think we are
Yeah.
hearing this, Mashood, so maybe we
Uh,
can move to the next one if that can be
sure.
open. Uh, the next
Sure.
set of content is basically what we call the reading aloud videos. So this is basically again uh, a lot of storybooks which are read aloud to children. So many times children may not be in a position, or they may not know how to read and write. So at least somebody reads aloud a story to them. And there are a few questions at the end of the story where we generally ask the children to answer those questions. So the idea is again more in terms of oral language development. You need to hear stories, you like get to know stories and hear them. So mm, no, I don't
रूम
think
टू रीड संस्था पिछले 2 वर्षों से उत्तर प्रदेश के बेसिक शिक्षा परिषद के स्कूलों में बच्चों में पढ़ने की आदत विकसित करने के लिए पुस्तकालयों की स्थापना के माध्यम से बहुत
sorry
अच्छा काम
Masud,
कर
I
रही
think we're not being
है।
able
इस
to hear the
कोविड-19 के दौरान
sound.
I think Saurabhji, it's possible that maybe the audio is not coming at your end. But here, I think on the live stream, I think it's being broadcasted.
Mashood, I'm not
So,
hearing your voice as well.
okay, can you hear me? Saurabh, can you hear me? Are you able to hear me, Saurabh? Okay, so we'll try to connect with Saurabh again. Meanwhile, we'll see this very interesting audio, this interesting story, which is being used by Room to Read to engage children.
स्कूल बंद हैं, इस समय में भी बहुत सारी वीडियो क्लिपिंग्स, अन्य ई कंटेंट के माध्यम से कहानियां और ऐसे माध्यमों से रूम टू रीड संस्था लगातार बच्चों तक जो पाठ्य सामग्री है उसको पहुंचाने की कोशिश कर रही है। मैं अपने सभी बच्चों से, शिक्षकों से, अन्य सभी जुड़े हुए लोगों से ये आग्रह करूंगा कि इस लॉकडाउन के दौरान भी, इस कोविड के कारण उत्पन्न हुई समस्या के दौरान भी रूम टू रीड द्वारा उपलब्ध कराई गई सामग्री का इस्तेमाल करें और उसका लाभ उठाएं और अपने अंदर पढ़ने की आदत विकसित करें। चलिए आज इस परिस्थिति में एक कहानी की चर्चा करते हैं आपसे। मेरे हाथ में एक किताब है। इस किताब का नाम है, आप देख रहे होंगे, इस पर तस्वीर बनी है जलेबी की। इस किताब का नाम है जलेबी। इस किताब में जलेबी नाम से एक कहानी है और इस कहानी को लिखा है और चित्र बनाया है उसका कनक शशि ने। और आज मैं आपको इस जलेबी नाम की कहानी को पढ़कर सुनाता हूँ। आपको आनंद आएगा, ऐसा मुझे उम्मीद है। दीपक है, सपना है और उनकी बुआ है। ये 3 लोग हैं इस कहानी में। सपना और दीपक मेले में गए। बुआ ने दोनों को 10 रुपए दिए, जैसे हम लोगों को भी बचपन में बुआ पैसे दिया करती थी। मेले में एक बड़ा झूला था। झूला गोल घूम रहा था। झूले पर बहुत सारे बच्चे थे। बच्चे चिल्ला रहे थे। दीपक ने कहा कि चलो झूला झूलें। दोनों टिकट घर की तरफ बढ़े। आपको पता है झूला झूलने के लिए टिकट लेना पड़ता है। सपना ने बताया टिकट 20 रुपए की है। दीपक बोला चलो फिर खिलौने खरीदते हैं। आगे खिलौनों की दुकान थी। दुकान में कई खिलौने थे। दुकान में बंदर और हाथी थे। दुकान में रेलगाड़ी और कारें थीं। दीपक बोला चलो कार लेते हैं। दुकानदार ने कार दिखाई। सपना ने बताया कार 50 रुपए की है। महंगा होने के नाते दीपक बोला चलो फिर मुखौटे देखें। आगे मुखौटों की दुकान थी। दुकान में कई मुखौटे थे। सपना ने शेर का मुखौटा लगाया। दीपक ने बंदर का मुखौटा लगाया। दीपक बोला चलो बंदर का मुखौटा लें। सपना ने दुकानदार से पैसे पूछे। एक मुखौटा 25 रुपए का था। दीपक बोला चलो फिर आगे चलें। आप देख रहे होंगे बच्चों, अलग अलग दुकानों पर दीपक और सपना जा रहे हैं। उन चीजों का दाम पूछ रहे हैं। वो खिलौने इत्यादि महंगे हैं, इसलिए वो आगे बढ़ते चले जा रहे हैं, उनको खरीद नहीं रहे हैं। अब कहानी में देखिए, आगे जलेबी का ठेला था। जलेबी समझ रहे होंगे बच्चों, आप लोगों ने जलेबी जरूर खाई होगी। उसी जलेबी का ठेला था। एक दोना जलेबी 5 रुपए की थी। सपना और दीपक ने जलेबी खाई। बुआ ने भी जलेबी खाई। अच्छा बच्चों, जलेबी तो आपने खाई ही होगी। आप कभी मेले में गए होंगे, आपने कोई और मिठाई या कोई और व्यंजन जरूर खाया होगा। तो ये रही जलेबी नाम की कहानी, जिसको कनक शशि ने लिखा है और रूम टू रीड संस्था ने इसको प्रकाशित किया है। मुझे उम्मीद है ये कहानी आपको अच्छी लगी होगी। ऐसे ही इस समय घर पर रह करके अलग अलग कहानियां आप पढ़ते रहिए, ऐसी मेरी अपेक्षा है।
Masud, can you hear me?
Yes. Are you? Am I audible?
Yeah, somewhere I am not being able to hear you. But maybe we can move to the next slide. Yeah, this one. So apart from the work that we did on the digital materials, we also uh, developed a lot of television and video episode and radio episodes. Again, in many cases, what happens is, children may not have access to an internet or a smartphone, but they usually have access to a radio or a television at home. And therefore, to kind of reach out to those children, we developed a series of literacy episodes again, on radio and on television. And again, what happened is, once you, mm, I mean, these were telecast either through community radios or All India Radio or through Doordarshan. And therefore, the attempt was again to reach out to a large number of children. And again, this essentially comprised of, someone reading out a story, having some questions at the end, or having some messages for the parents on how they could engage the children on day-to-day activities and stuff like that. On the next slide, so we also, as I said, we realized quickly that the the digital interventions are not reaching everybody, and therefore we quickly moved to non-digital interventions then. Essentially what we created was a set of worksheets which can be given to children so that they can do it at home. And these worksheets were designed in a way that they are very visual, with very little adult supervision. They could be doing these worksheets. The other thing that we did was we also created a handbook for parents, which is again a very visual representation of what parents can do at home to support the literacy of children. We also, in certain areas, we also ran a mobile library van. So the van would go from village to village, park there, and it's a way to kind of provide access to children to quality children's literature. So that was what we essentially tried doing in terms of non-digital materials also during this period. So moving to the next slide, the other thing that we also did during the COVID period was, as I said, there was a lot of work done with teachers. So there was one thing was a whole set of literacy courses that we developed for teachers, which was basically to kind of, as I said, there's not very many literacy focused training that happens for teachers, either in the pre-service area or in the in-service area. So these courses were developed more in terms of building capacity of teachers on foundational literacy. And these courses were then uploaded into Diksha platform in certain cases, and that's how these things, that's what the engagement with the teachers were. We also did some offline engagement with teachers where they were sent, reading materials to engage themselves, to basically to build their capacities on foundational literacy. So these were all the various kinds of efforts. As I said, there was a set of efforts which we used to do earlier, and then there was another set of efforts and initiatives that we undertook as the COVID pandemic rolled on. So this was what, in a nutshell, has Room to Read has been up to in all this time. The next, in a kind of, to summarize all of this, what I would like to do is play a short video which summarizes most of these activities. In this video, you'll also get a glimpse of the girls' education activities that we do. I didn't talk a lot about that because this session was essentially about literacy. But can you play the video, Masho?
Learning to dream, waking up to new possibilities, stepping forward on a new journey, creating a world where dreams come true. world change starts with educated children. It all begins here, in this Room to Read. Room to Read seeks to transform the lives of millions of children in the world through the power of education. The education interventions of Room to Read are structured around early grade literacy and girls' education. The literacy program is presently being implemented in 9 states and helps develop foundational literacy skills. Here, Room to Read's efforts are supported by a well-calibrated, scientifically designed instructions program which exposes children to all elements of comprehensive literacy learning, namely orality, akshara knowledge, and exposure to a variety of text. For this, Room to Read enlists local authors and illustrators for the creation of age-appropriate, culturally relevant and thought-provoking storybooks for young children. These books are stocked in print-rich libraries in government schools, reader-friendly spaces created to trigger the children's imagination, gradually turning them into habitual readers. Today, there are close to 10,000 libraries across all government schools engaged in the program. A major facet of the literacy program is its instructional component. Room to Read undertakes the development of pedagogical skills through clear and well-organized weekly instructions package for the teachers to develop better reading and comprehension skills in children. Room to Read's digital platform, Literacy Crowd, is enabling a new generation of children and teachers to access original, high-quality children's books titles in their local languages. The results are evident. With the literacy program, children can read a minimum of 35 words per minute with comprehension by end of grade 2. In India, secondary education among low-income communities is an overwhelming challenge. With a strong commitment to achieve gender equity, the Girls' Education Program of Room to Read provides participants with life skills education, family school, community engagement, mentoring support, and targeted material support. Life skills training helps girls to think critically, empathize, and rely on themselves to rise to everyday obstacles, preventing them from a better life. Led by social mobilizers, life skills sessions are practice-oriented, activity-based, self-instructional plans designed in a staggered, age-appropriate manner and aligned to the developmental milestone. The central figure in the Girls' Education Program is the social mobilizer, a woman from the community who plays the very significant role of a wise and caring adult, a mentor, and a positive role model. With one social mobilizer for every 80 girls, the mobilizers help to raise a peer solidarity group in which the girls come to their own solutions, taking each other's help. To not only limit girls' education to schools, Room to Read engages actively with families and communities of the girl students. Active engagement with the government is the key success of both the Girls' Education Program as well as Literacy Program. For the development to be sustainable, Room to Read follows a uniquely scaffolded approach in its collaboration with the government. The first phase is I Do, or demonstration of how the programs are to be implemented in select schools. In the second, We Do, or collaboration phase, the programs are scaled to larger number of schools with Room to Read as providing the requisite technical expertise. The final You Do, or expansion phase, is when the government scales up the programs across all schools in the states using their own resources. Today, as a pandemic rages across the globe, 70 years of India's progress on girls' education and early grade risks are being undone. Room to Read has responded to the crisis with a multi-pronged strategy. With a deep knowledge of India's complex community needs, strong relationships with decision makers, teachers, and community leaders, Room to Read has tried to find new ways to facilitate learning. We have embarked on the path to change the world through the power of education. And the journey continues.
Thank you, Mashood. That was helpful. So, sorry about this issue with the mic. That's now
Sure.
resolved itself.
Is my voice audible now, Saurabh ji?
Yes, now. Yeah, it
Okay,
is.
great.
It's clear.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes.
So moving on to the next slide, I would just take a few minutes to talk about what we see as the way going forward. Uh, and I think some of the key learnings that, as I was generally mentioning, I mean, the first thing is that, of course, there's there is this whole digital divide, which is not helping us reach all children with digital content. Of course, there are certain contents which work better, like a TV, a radio, or IVR systems. But nevertheless, that's also has its limitations. Offline materials, whether it's worksheets, whether it's materials that you give to children, self-learning materials, they seem to work the best. And that's generally what we are seeing. Also, the fact that in all of this, what we have not been able to do is do a proper assessment of all of these digital content that's going out, all the virtual training that's happening to teachers. All of these have been largely one way, like content being delivered. We really have not been able to see how all of these has actually led to a lot of uh, actual learning happening in the field. So that's been a challenge. uh, so moving to the next slide, I think going forward, there are two major things that we see how foundation literacy is going to be addressed. One is on the domain of children's engagement, where you're talking about a mix of online and offline content, which will continue to be delivered to children as they remain at home, or even when they come to school. Some of these content can be repurposed and used for the literacy development of children. The other other aspect of home as a learning space is engagement with parents, to basically let parents know how they can help in the children's learning at home, whether it be small activities, whether it be storytelling, whether it be just listening and speaking to the children. These are all pre-literacy activities which are very crucial to the development of foundational literacy skills. And just to get children and parents engaged in that is going to be a crucial part. The the other aspect, which is coming to the next slide, is the serious issue that when children come back to school, we all know now that they are going to come back with a huge learning loss, and it would be I would say it would be naive to say that a child who has not attended schools for last 2 years, they suddenly come to school and in 6 months time they would get all the competencies of the last 3 years. That's probably not going to happen. We should not even try to do that. Once children come back to school, there would be a period where you'll have to engage them with various social emotional activities, because children are coming after a long time. Many of them probably would not even have a lot of uh, uh, exposure to formal schooling. So the school system is new to them. Many of them have undergone stress, trauma in their homes. So you have to have a period where you engage children on various social, emotional, joyful activities, and then you start getting them onto curricular content. And we believe that the learning loss that has accrued should actually be we should develop a curriculum that helps to mitigate this learning loss over a 2-3 years period, because it's not something that can be done over a remedial program of 3 months or 6 months. It requires much more thinking through curricular restructuring to be able to help children mitigate this learning loss and therefore be on at grade with their learning skills and habits. Finally, on the last slide, I think we are seeing the good part is the government is aware of that. The national education policy has really brought about the whole salience needed on foundational literacy. So there's a lot of positive environment that has happened. And governments, by and large, are sympathetic to the needs of the children. They definitely have tried to reach out with all online materials, but now they are also open to reaching out with offline materials as well. So that I think generally governments have been responsive. It's and the non-profit sector has anyway tried to come up with whatever was possible to reach out to the children and meet their learning gaps. So I think the need now is really for governments, non-governments, private sector to come together, work together collaboratively to try and address this the immediate learning gap and the long-term FLN goals in a time-bound manner. So I would like to end there and happy to take any questions, any thoughts that you might have.
Uh, Thank you so much, Saurabh, for this remarkably comprehensive overview of where we stand in terms of foundational literacy. One, and you've talked about the innovations that can help, disrupt this status quo of children, continuing to lose learning and when schools reopen, you've also set like a broad agenda as to what can be done over the years as well. So here we would also like to invite the convener of Disruptive Literacy Talks Detox, Dr. Sunita Gandhi ji. Also, I think she'll also join us in a minute. We would like to take a question from the audience as well. There are some members who are joining us.
Sure.
So Nishant Srivastav, he's asking this question: that children in grade 1 last year will be in grade 3 by 2022, and without any classroom learning experience, how can this learning gap be compensated? So, or something similar, which I also wanted to ask was, here, whenever schools reopen in across different states, we'll have uh, a situation where there are children from the teachers will be having the previous students who are facing learning losses. Many of them, there will be new admissions, which some of you, so the point which you raised of many children from low fee private schools shifting to government schools, migrants who might have come back to their native places, they enrolling their children to government schools. So there is a situation which we face, where teachers will face, where there'll be so many different new children, and everyone will be at a different level. So the question is, how, first of all, how do we ensure that children who are enrolled in schools, they do come to school, and then where do we start the learning from?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the immediate challenge. Of course, I mean, we do face a situation, as you rightly said, where there would be an increase in enrollment and there would be children coming in with almost no learning. So there are a couple of things over here. One is on the enrollment side, I think governments are pretty well placed to address that. They have been doing this enrollment drives for ages. So I think the fact that children, at least in the lower grades, it's not so much of a problem. Governments do manage to get children in the catchment area into schools. So that's not so much of my concern as the learning loss bit of it. Now, on the learning loss side, so on the enrollment, there would be cases where there might be cases where families which have faced huge financial stresses, they might want to withdraw their children from school. Again, that probably would not happen so much on government schools, more so on the private sector schools, but that's still manageable to get children back to school. We definitely need to allow children a period of, as I said, of interventions, of social emotional interventions, to get them accustomed to the school system. That time you will have to give every child, because it's children who are coming to schools for the first time, many of them. So you will have to allow that period before you start bombarding them with curricular content. So that definitely is one part of it. On the learning loss side, I mean, I know a lot of people have been talking about, uh, you'll have classrooms filled with children of various levels. My sense is that's not going to happen. You'll probably have a situation where you have a whole lot of children, grade 1 children, grade 2 children, grade 3 children, all coming with no learning at all. I mean, let's face it, they have not had any schooling in the last 3 years. The level difference would come for the higher grades. If there's a grade 5 child, grade 6 child, they would have forgotten a lot of things that they had learned in the last 2 years. There you will find a lot of level difference happening. But here in the earlier grades, what you will find is a lot of children coming in without no competencies at all. So you will almost have to start from zero with all of them. So that's one part of it. The second part, as I said, I mean, the worst thing that you can do is expect that all of them will come in, and then in 6 months time or in 3 months time we'll give them a crash course and they will all start knowing how to read and write. That's the challenge, and I think that is where we should avoid doing. We should accept the fact that it's a huge learning loss of 2 years, and you cannot expect them to be done in 3 months time. You have to do it, you have to do a structured intervention. You have to look at a long term. I would say that, yeah, for a child who is in grade 3 next year, who has actually not have any learning in the last 2 years, that child would need another 2 years to be at grade. I mean, you cannot expect that child to be at grade till grade 5 at least. And the gap is, and wherever the gap is more, it takes more time. So a child who is entering grade 1 next year, for him or her, it's not a big deal, because they're anyway coming with zero things. You are getting into grade 1, so your grade 1 curriculum would take care of that. The child who is in grade 2 next year, they would have lost 1 year of curriculum. So it will take another 1 year for that child to make up. So I would say that child would only be at grade in by the end of grade 3 or grade 4, early grade 4. But a child who is in grade 3 next year, which is the cohort which is the maximum affected, I think that cohort will not be at grade before grade 5, and one should accept that fact, and one should plan accordingly for those children.
Here we would
Right.
like to also invite Sunita ji as well, as we know that she's also the convener of the Detox Forum here. So Sunita ji, we've just witnessed a very impactful presentation by Saurav ji. What would your thoughts be about the way forward where schools will be reopening, and as Saurav ji was also commenting that there will be children with major learning losses as well. So how do we kind of accelerate the whole process of getting back on track? Yeah. You're on mute, Sunita ji.
Saurabh ji and Mashur ji, I would like to start by saying that I really endorse whatever Saurabh ji has said in relation to this very, very good question. And I appreciate the person who asked that question, because there is going to be a learning gap and we can acknowledge that for sure. Saurabh ji has also mentioned about a staggered approach. So we'll need to think of that as well. Obviously, it can't be like all there immediately. The few suggestions I'd have are that we need to firstly focus on getting them to school, because that's going to be a major challenge and I think Saurabh alluded to it, is going to be a major challenge to get children to the school, because they've got used to the idea that school doesn't matter. And there's been no emphasis on going to school, and parents also sort of many years government of India has tried to get children into school. It is not like automatic. And now with the relaxed mindsets of the people, I should think that this will be a major issue as well. Some children will be excited, but we might lose a whole bunch of them, which is totally undesirable. So how and what can we be done to get the children into school is number one priority. Number two, possibly focusing not on everything, because we'll have to cut learning some places, and this is not really cutting learning. It is more integrated learning. So if we focus squarely on just two most fundamentally important objectives, which is literacy and numeracy, whether it is a class 5 child who has lost 2 years, who was in grade 3 2 years ago, a class 3 child who was in grade 1 2 years ago, we really need to focus entirely our efforts for the first 3, maybe 6 months, only entirely on literacy and numeracy skills and filling that learning gap. And that means, of course, room to read also should be created in a big way. And in fact, reading should be one of the most major priorities as soon as they're able to read text, that they should be able to read lots of literature. Here, peer-to-peer learning would be very powerful, where peers kind of match up and work with each other rather than teacher reading to the class, which takes a lot of effort. And children reading on their own may be difficult, so she may tease them into reading, get them excited, read a part of the story, and then the children continue reading at home. So they'll have access to books is going to be really critical, and that's where Room to Read will obviously come in and support that effort, and many more, I'm sure. So accelerating learning would mean slowing down initially to speed up later on. There's no reason to teach science and social studies separately, or computers separately. Computers can be taught. It's 1 hour a week, maybe, or 2 hours a week. That's okay. But the bulk of the education should be like 80% of the education should be focused on just literacy and numeracy skills for the first 3 to 6 months. Given that it'll take about 3 months to get everybody back into school, so first 6 months literacy, and followed by that numeracy. Or simultaneously numeracy. So how much time should be given, how the timetable should be divided, has to be thought very carefully. We have to go back to the fundamentals. It used to be the 3 hours when we learned in school, and somehow the bag got bigger and bulkier with so many more subjects added on. Maybe it's the wonderful publishers giving us such lovely variety of things. We kept saying, "Chalo, ye bhi add kar dete hain. Chalo, ye bhi dal dete hain," and the bag got bigger and thick and heavier. So we need to now reduce the bag to the minimum, and the minimum will be literacy and numeracy. Let them get up to speed, slow down in that sense. You're not going to do the other stuff yet, but once they've got the fundamentals in place, obviously we can accelerate the rest of it. And I'd say that in the teaching of literacy and numeracy, you also need to integrate the environment, integrate social aspects, so that it's a truly integrated discussion. So the kinds of stories that I'm sure the Room to Read has, develop broader perspectives about life. And if we can combine it with discussion about the environment, let children do some scientific experiments at home, like make a lemonade, or do something with light bulbs and such things as they get older. I mean, those are all parallel activities. They can be done through assignments and a bit of demo. But even so, if that means taking focus away from literacy and numeracy, then they better not be done just yet. But if they can be integrated, for example, if you're doing an experiment and next thing you have to do is write about it, or come back and do a role play about it, or share a story about your experience, a lot of peer learning opportunities and group learning opportunities should also be provided. So we need to think of a different agenda, not the old agenda just yet. And in any case, never, hopefully, the old agenda, because things can be done so much vastly better.
Right. One aspect which organizations like Room to Read and here at Global Dream and all our other peer organizations that are working on, government of course has a major focus on, is teacher capacity building. In this current context, and I would like to ask this to Saurabh ji, what do you feel are the most important areas of teacher capacity building which needs to be focused on in the context of foundational learning? And there's a lot of focus on online teacher capacity building platforms as well. Do you feel that that's something? What are the things that have worked in online teacher capacity building for foundational learning specifically, and what can be improved there?
So, as rightly said, teacher capacity building is a key. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, that even pre-COVID, you really never had specific teacher capacity building on foundational learning. Teachers would be trained on all kinds of things, on pedagogy, on STEM, on higher orders thinking skills, and all of that. But the basics of literacy and numeracy, I mean, I'm sure if you go out and talk to teachers in the field, very few teachers who are teaching grades 1 and 2 would be able to tell you the basic principles of literacy. How does a child learn how to read and write? So I think we had really not done a good job on teacher training on those aspects. So there's always a role of teacher training to strengthen that. Now, what has happened post COVID is, of course, there's been a huge push for online virtual teacher training. Now, virtual teacher training can be uh, can be good at certain on certain cases where you have to train large number of teachers. If you go through a traditional cascade type of model, there's a huge dilution of content. So online training can actually help to kind of restrict that dilution. But what I think is the way forward should be actually a blended approach. You cannot really have an entirely online training because one, we have not yet uh, assessed the efficacy of those online models. So teachers who have gone through the successive online training, whether they have gained in terms of their knowledge, whether they have been able to use that knowledge in the field, are still things which are subject to research and subject to discussion. The second thing is what is happening for governments. It might become a very, I would say, a shortcut, because arranging a training program is always resource intensive. You need budget, you need resources to do training programs. Now, for a government, it might look that online thing is the solution, because at 1/10 of your cost, you are actually going to reach many teachers. But is it going to be the same impact as a face-to-face teaching? Probably not. And probably the solution lies somewhere in between, because we also understand the challenges of face-to-face teaching, the dilution of a cascade model. So ideally, I think the best option is to do a blended model where you have some amount of virtual teaching followed by a face-to-face coaching session or an interactive session. Uh, that I would say would be the ideal. But we'll have to see how governments really tackle this thing and how they want to move forward. Sunita,
Right.
do you want to say anything on that?
Uh,
Yes, so blended learning is definitely a good idea. But when we're talking about the foundational levels, when we're talking about the rock bottom, um, uh, realities, where they don't even know how to read, we need to think of something more hands-on. They can be blended also. They can also be videos and interactive content on the net, which is available, and we have been providing that such a content. I think Mashood would probably have something to share on this as well, where you can blend learning for the lowest most in terms of learning development of the skill to just read in the first place, and then we plug into your network, like to be able to read. So
Yeah.
how would that go? And perhaps Mashu, there's some things to share, right?
Right. So I think what Saurabh is trying to say about, in terms of the teacher capacity building aspects, blended learning would definitely be the way to go forward, as we are trying to understand more. And what also Sunita ji talked about, the blended learning for children as well. Coming to the question of children, I wanted to ask. Uh, Saurabh ji, also about what do we think about assessments? So the NEB talks about competency-based assessments and the whole reform around assessments. Uh, Specifically talking about foundational learning, and kids coming back to school whenever schools reopen. Do you feel that any reform in how we approach assessments will need to be done to so that we really ensure that quality foundation learning is delivered to every child?
Yeah, assessment to my mind is kind of a double-edged sword. That assessments are very necessary because what get assessed get done. But then you also don't want to create a very assessment-heavy system, and the concern with assessment is then it becomes so high stake that then people just start manipulating the system. So that doesn't really help anyone. So I think on assessments, there are 2 points. I think the focus of the entire assessment system has to be on formative assessments, something that the teacher can assess at his or her level to understand whether the child is learning or not and take corrective action. The idea should not be to rate systems कि यूपी अच्छा कर रहा है, राजस्थान खराब कर रहा है, फलाना better कर रहा है. So then it starts a competition and people start manipulating data. I think that should not be the intent of assessment, especially at the early grades when you are. I mean, these are very small children. They don't even understand the importance of assessment. They don't even. I mean, you don't want to kind of put them under so much pressure that it becomes a exam phobia for them. That's definitely not um, recommended. So I would say there should be assessment. There should be assessment more at the teacher level to understand if children are doing okay, they are doing as per plan, and take corrective action. I think more than the assessment, the corrective action is what is more important, because you can do n number of assessments, but if you are not going to act on those assessments, what's the purpose of doing those? It's just not for passing and failing children, because ultimately the objective of an assessment should be to improve the learning. It should be improve, take action and get the children to learn better. So and somewhere I think we have failed in that regard. I mean, we have all done all kinds of assessments, but never that assessment never feeds back into the system to say that identify this child is weak in this area, or certain things that this child is not being able to understand, and therefore I need to do a different kind of an approach. Every child learns differently, so your assessment should be able to capture what the strengths are of a child more than the weaknesses of a child, and then build on those strengths. So I think that kind of a comprehensive assessment system is definitely very helpful. But as I say, I mean, my caution would be that don't make it a system which is very high stake and therefore prone to manipulation.
So this is music to my ears because I've been an advocate of competition with self rather than others, and formative assessment, which leads to immediate corrective action. Because as you
Yeah.
so rightly said, there's no point to do an assessment if you're not going to take corrective action. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's not supposed to be judgmental. It's not supposed to do anything other than answer the question, what next? And for the teacher, what next? And for the child, what next? So we spend a whole month preparing a child, or 2 months preparing a child, even 3 months, half yearly examination, and we give this horrendous test at the end, and it takes maybe 2 weeks out of learning,
Yeah.
sometimes a month out of learning when we do a half yearly or an annual, and that is time wasted to learning. I think assessment should be done in an ongoing way, so the time is not taken away from learning, and to provide feedback on what has been learned and not learned, and to the extent what has not been learned, to take the corrective action immediately, not wait for another day. So when we do a
Absolutely.
half yearly, we're losing a lot of information throughout the 3 months, 4 months of teaching as to what could have been done better by the teacher. It's not to be assumed that because the teacher has taught, the children have learned. So what have they learned? What they've not learned? Where are the things that can be fixed? It's teachers' responsibility, but also children should know for themselves where did they went wrong. So I am really against the idea of summative marking. totally against it. Not for the child. The teacher can keep a record of it for herself, but the child should know out of these, 10 questions, and I say don't do 10, do 11. Out of these 11 questions, how many the children got right and how many they got wrong and which ones they got wrong, that they themselves take the responsibility to make revision cards for those and to fix those things. And then the teacher takes a macro view of the class and fixes the things that are the weakest for the class, and those that are in the middle can pair up the children and so forth. So we propose a certain schedule of things regarding that. So instant feedback, which may not be possible with the old ways, because old ways are very summative. The teacher has to take the work home, has to correct it, and then bring it back the next day. By that time it is already too late, because the children's reality is moved on. You can't even give 1 day break. You have to go immediately from the lesson to the assessment to corrective action. Now the corrective action can be started that day, and can the children can brood over, think about, fix their own issues till the next day. That's okay, but that they must know where they went wrong immediately. Now for that, what we have done is we've developed something we are calling I versus I. It's a mobile app, and basically it picks up data immediately and tells the teacher where they belong without having to go and sit on a computer and do a computerized test. So I think that's very powerful. And instant feedback is the key watchwords, because feedback should be instant and not delayed. So how do you do that? So for that, this ipsative or I versus I tool is very powerful. The other thing is regarding how do we check on whether the learning has taken place at the macro level. So the policymakers are always very keen to know, and they should be, as to where are the troubled spots. So for them to get to know that instant feedback can feed into data at the macro level. So the district level, besides the child, the teacher, the principal of the school, at the district level or block level, and then at the state level, they should know where are the pressure points, either in terms of a topic that's not going so well. I mean, as detailed as that. For a particular grade level, grade 5, they should know HCF and LCM, and that's not going so well for a minute. So the corrective action be at the level of the detail. So teachers are giving more reinforcement, they're giving more worksheets, they're giving more training on that particular issue. So policymakers also need to think of what next, not just punitive action, oh, they didn't do so they should be XYZ, focus on the next. And the third point I'd like to make is creating intrinsic motivation. That is beyond the carrot and stick approach to incentivizing and motivating the teacher, to build that intrinsic motivation, that love of seeing their children as successful, and that itself giving them the helper's high, and be a feedback mechanism to their own motivation. So those are some of the thoughts in relation to assessments and teacher training. I'd like to say that we need to have a vastly different teacher training. The old teacher training does not really consider the belief system of the teacher, while that is the starting point of everything. So something to think of. That's all from me. Mashood is getting on with time, I just noticed. So I think I have to slow down on this. Right.
Yes. So thank you for your comments, Sunita ji. One final question which we would like to also take. I think there was one participant who had asked a question. So I think it's about from Mr. Sanjay Singh, who's saying, how do you see home as learning space in new normal? So based on this question, Saurabh ji, you had made an interesting remark where you said that Room to Read tries to bring the child's home learning environment, or the home language, into the classroom. Now that learning is happening at home, is it possible to take the classroom language back to home as well? And how do you see this thing moving ahead, and especially in terms of multilingual contexts? How does the home language and the the medium of instruction or the official language, who takes the action, and how do we move ahead on this?
Yeah, I think the whole issue of home language, as I said, is it has to be looked at various levels, and I think the first thing is a mindset change that Sunita ji also kind of mentioned at the level of the teacher, to look at language as a resource and not as a challenge. So if a child is coming with a different home language, it's not something to be ashamed of, because it's the child's own language. The child should feel proud of that language, and the child should be encouraged to speak in that language. Ultimately, what you want the child to do is to express herself, to speak out, and it really doesn't matter in what language that they're speaking at the initial thing. So the first thing is that a teacher has to have that mindset of being open, uh, and kind of looking at the larger objective is for the child to understand a language, to understand the nuances of a language, to be able to communicate in that language. That's more important. The transition from the home language to the school language can be happen at a later date as well. I mean, it can, depending on how different the languages are. So if you are speaking in Bhojpuri at home and you want to shift to Hindi, that transition can happen early on. But if you are speaking in a tribal language at home, say you are speaking Garasia at home and you want to move to Hindi, that transition would take long. And I think the whole thing is to be flexible, to adapt those things. I mean, you will have a classroom, and multilinguality kind of plays out in various ways. So you can have a school in Uttar Pradesh, as I said, children speaking Bhojpuri at home, and they are needed to be transitioned to Hindi. Hindi for them is also a language uh, that they are not unfamiliar with. So they hear Hindi, they speak Bhojpuri, that's okay, but they hear Hindi also. So the transition is much easier. Cut to a situation in an urban area, say in Delhi or even in Lucknow, in a private school, where you have children coming from a Bengali background, a Tamil background, a Odia background, and they all are expected to learn English, which is a very foreign language for each of them. So that transition is a very difficult ball game, where every child is coming from a very different language background, and then you want them to learn in some another X language, which is totally foreign for all of them. So I think every case has to be dealt with in their own way. Uh, Going back to the question that was raised as home as a learning space, I think where home can play a key role in foundational years, and I would say I'm restricting myself to foundational years because that's where the home role is so much important. Things like storytelling, it used to be a part of our home culture always. I mean, our dadis and nannies used to tell sort of stories, and that's how a lot of us grew up. I mean, our exposure to language is always through storytellings, that we hear so much of stories. We used to be encouraged to talk in the home. Even as toddlers, you always try to get the toddlers to talk a lot. Even if it is rubbish, you just want them to talk. You don't want them to express. So these are all what we call the pre-literacy skills, and these are best done at home environment. The parents can, I mean, you don't need to be a literate parent to encourage a child to speak up, to encourage a child to talk about his or her experience. Just ask them what happened in school today, what did they discuss with their peers today, what games did they play with the friends today. So engaging children into discussions, making them feel important, part of the decision making process in the house. So get their inputs in, आज खाना क्या बनेगा घर पे आप बताओ. So, all of these things are very critical components of a learning process. And I think home plays a very important role in encouraging and promoting a lot of these pre-literacy, pre-numeracy skills. Uh, and I think that's where we have to pitch ourselves, because somehow what has happened over time is that parents feel very disempowered. They feel that we don't know anything and it's the school's prerogative to teach, and we can't really support in the process. I think again it's a more of a mindset issue that one has to work on, and basically tell the parents that there are things that can be done at home. which improves the literacy, foundation literacy, numeracy skills of children. And I think that's where we want to kind of focus our efforts, at least in this situation where you don't know when schools will open, whether they will again close down or not. So, घर पे क्या हो सकता है, which parents can be doing.
Sunita ji, you wanted to comment on this
Yeah,
question? Yeah.
sure, of course. I think fantastic points made by Sir already. What I can mention, maybe additionally, of course, I love the idea of storytelling, and I think that culture is dying away. We need to work a lot more on that. There should be reading in any language. I totally agree with that point made by Sir. And speaking. Basically is also dying down. Like, we find that children just say very minimum of things. There's a not a lot of discussion in the household. So how do we counter that? I think perhaps one of the suggestions I would have is that where there's technology, they should get access to ebooks that are also audiobooks that can be read to you, so they listen a lot more. So the classic LSRW, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, that should be the methodology followed at home, and somehow we get that message out through the teachers that they should have an ebook library in their mind, or references that the teachers can suggest. Where there's not the technology available, the device, where we can go for physical library. In any case, there should be a physical library in every single home, whether it be a small library. It can be also, the religious text in the homes that are read to by the children, or with the children, or to the children, depending on the age group. There should also be watching of carefully selected videos in the different languages that they are working with, starting with their own mother tongue. But if not, then in the next language they need to learn in school, they should be really watching a lot of videos, carefully selected videos. Unfortunately, there is a list of videos that are good, but then it's parents may lose track of it, and then they watch all sorts of rubbish, and that's not on. So it should be monitored time with the children where they watch videos, because videos are very good for listening to stories and recollecting facts, sharing those facts with the family members. So there's a lot more engagement and speaking opportunity as well. So there's just some of the thoughts, nothing really major that we don't know already, but it's a question of reminding ourselves and getting the children to do so. Of course, you can do things like, story cards, you can do picture cards, talk about a picture. Children can help select pictures from magazines, newspapers, and so forth, that are age appropriate, and then talk about those things. So a lot of talking opportunity, sharing opportunity, because when they speak is when they begin to also write, because what they speak, what they conceptualize in the mind, is what they can write. And of course, later on, writing also, uploading those stories on the net for the children. And there's so many wonderful sharing blogs for stories and such things.
Okay, thank you, Saurav ji and Sunita ji for these comments. And I think the questions from the audience also are on these lines, on how we kind of this kind of removal of distance between the school, the community, and the home. It's really it's led to a lot of churning of thoughts and ideas and innovations as well. And of course, Room to Read is doing a great job here. In conclusion, I would also like to share with Saurav ji and with our audience the some of the experimental approach towards literacy which Global Dream has also been doing. And here at Global Dream, the main idea that we are working with is to help learners, be it children or adults, learn new alphabets, new words, become literate using their own their own power of mind connections, of using their own knowledge about their own language, their spoken language, to learn the unknown. So going from the known of their language to going to the unknown of alphabets, words, and sentences as well. And also, what we are trying to do here at an experimental approach is also to move from concrete things which the child or the adult is aware of, and move to the unknown aspects of alphabets and codes and sentences and texts. So we just wanted to show a very short video for everyone, which explains what kind of methodology we're using here as an experiment.
ये क्या है? बत्तख। बत्तख की पहली आवाज क्या होती है? ब। बत्तख। ब। बत्तख। ब। बत्तख। ब। ये क्या है? सपेरा। सपेरा की पहली आवाज क्या होती है? स। सपेरा। स। सपेरा। स। सपेरा। स। अब दोनों आवाजों को जोड़ेंगे। पहली आवाज थी ब। दूसरी आवाज थी स। ब। स।
So based on essentially this methodology of not starting with the Varnmala or the alphabets, and starting from images and asking, following the principles of asking questions from the learners, not telling them but asking them, waiting for the learner to answer. What we found in our approach was that when the answer is coming directly from the learner themselves, they're able to build those mind connections. And we've seen many learners, young children, as young as 6 to 7 years old, and even adults who are completely unlettered, they can't recognize letters, very in a very short time, in just a period of a 20-minute lesson, they are able to start forming 2 to 3 letter words as well. They're able to recognize and read it as well. So the approach that we were using was to look to have shorter sessions, especially with adults, because they don't have a lot of time. 20-minute sessions, and within one lesson covering, let's say, around 12 alphabets. And at the end of every lesson, there is practice. So based on that, we've created certain toolkits as well, which I would just like to give you a very quick glimpse about. Yeah. So as you can see here, that these are images which the child or the adult is already aware of, and then they're able to pronounce it, and they're able to learn these codes, these concrete abstract codes of alphabets from these images, from the sounds. And then after every lesson, there is a quick practice session. So within 10 lessons of 20 minutes each, we felt many learners reaching literacy up to grade 3 level as well here. So I think with that, we would like to conclude this very thought-provoking session. We had a wonderful presentation by Saurabh ji. He has the remarkable work which is being done by Room to Read. We really appreciate that, and how despite the pandemic, Saurabh ji and his team have been absolutely on the ground working to reach out to the last child, and making sure that learning continues even in these very dire circumstances. So again, Saurabh ji, I would like you to have the last word in this session for our audience members and who will be watching this video in the future. How can stakeholders, organizations, individuals contribute to this mission of disruptive literacy? If we could have your last word, please.
No, I just want to thank Global Dreams and Mashood and Sunita ji for hosting these talks. I mean, these are such a important set of discussions that we all need to have and engage in if we want to build a better India. And as I said, I think my last word would be that with the national education policy, with the national mission of foundation literacy that the government of India has announced, I see a lot of hope. I see that we are in the right direction to, as a country, to make a difference, to come out of the challenges that we're faced with foundation literacy. I think there's a increased acknowledgement of the importance of foundation literacy and numeracy in children's future learning. And I think all these are very positive indicators. And we just hope that with organizations like yours and ours and all coming together and supporting the government, would be able to come out of this challenge of foundation literacy that we find ourselves in, and though this education policy has termed it as a learning crisis, I hope that by the time the next education policy is written, it would be recorded as the biggest learning opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. On that wonderful note, thank you once again, Saurabh ji, for your very valuable time. Thank you, Sunita ji, for your time. And to all the audience members, I think you've been very insightful in your questions and comments as well. So thank you so much. And we'll see you in the next session of Detox. Thank you.
Thank you so much.